Hey there everybody, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. Today I want to show you how to make this very fancy looking ring that has all these colors and sparkles, and it's generally something I wish could exist in real life. Actually, I don't know why it couldn't exist. It just seems like an expensive looking ring. Anyways, let's make this thing. So, the idea is we're going to make a single gemstone, and then we're going to copy it radially around a ring, as you might expect. So, let's do some basic modeling. I'm going to start off with a plane. I'm going to take these two edges. I'm going to extrude, right-click so that they're centered, and then scale them on the y-axis and bring them down. This is just to make the general shape of the gem. You could get more complicated here by doing some fancy stuff. I just like the look of this. I want to keep it basic. With this, we can extrude it upwards, and then extrude it upwards again and scale it down. And that's kind of like the basis of our gem. We could get a bit more complicated. One thing I like to do is Alt-E for a repeated extrude, which lets you extrude repeatedly, as you might expect. But you have to set these settings. So I'm going to do it like this. This is going to make 10 cuts as we rise. And I'm going to scale this with proportional editing, using a sphere fall off, I think. Something like that. Just the shape of a gemstone. You could do whatever you want here. For this, I'm going to need to actually set some environment settings so we get some nice reflections and all this. And we're going to make this a transparent and kind of reflective material. So, in the world settings, I'm going to add a HDRI. Hype, drama, reaction, inert. HDRI, we're going to add one of those. So now in the render tab, you can see we have nice lighting, and all we need to do with this is make it transparent. And I'm also going to set this to shade smooth, which is going to break the shading a bit, but you can fix that by enabling auto smooth. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that. So, in the material editor, I'm going to make a material. I'm going to call this gem, and it's just going to be, like I said, this transparent, reflective material. So bring up the transmission, bring down the roughness, and pick a color for your gemstone. It could be like this, or you can use a glass BSDF, which has a slightly different look. Main thing you want to look for here is the IOR is going to change kind of the vibe of this gem. But I'm going to keep it around 1.45 because that's very near to the IOR, index of refraction of glass, okay? Now the trick to making this look super cool instead of just like this is I'm actually going to make a copy of this, and we're going to use geometry nodes to add those little sparkly elements inside. So in geometry nodes, I'm going to make this a Geonodes thing, and we can rename this to Geonodes. So you can see we have two copies. One of them is a geometry nodes copy, and I want to distribute points inside the volume. To do that, I'm going to run a mesh to volume, so we have a volumetric. Now you can see there's a bit of an outline of a cloud. Bring down that bandwidth, and distribute points in volume. And you can see now we actually have points inside of this shape, and we can bring up the density. And what I want to do is for each one of these, make a little sparkly element, which for me I'm going to use a cube that we are going to randomize the size of and bring down the maximum size. So we just have these tiny sparklies that exist inside of here. We could actually bring up the density of that. You could also add some random rotation, but I don't think you're going to be able to tell through the glass. Okay, so we also want to set a material for this different from our gem. And now in the shading workspace, we can actually do something. So you can see they're kind of suspended inside the gem. For the material, which we're going to call Sparkly, you can see if I bring up the emission and pick an emissive color, these kind of become more visible. I'm going to bring up the strength of these, and that's going to add these nice little sparklies to the gem that kind of refracts and reflects with all this like glass stuff. And let me try something a bit higher. I think I like the look of something like 10. Okay, so that is the base of our gem. And speaking of bases, I just want to make a kind of golden plate for this to sit on, and then we can start copying this radially. So I'm going to select the bottom 3 faces here, and I'm going to duplicate, so now I have the bottom selection again. And we can turn this into its own object by separating by loose parts. So now we have its own object here. And for this, I just want to create a bit of a base. So I'm just going to select this and then extrude along normals. The reason this looks weird is because we're using the same material for this, so it kind of looks like we're extending the gem over here. What I want to do instead is I want to give this, yet again, another material. I'm going to call this gold. And for that, let's use a fresh principled BSDF. So now you can see this is its own thing. For that, I want it to be a metallic, low roughness, kind of golden-y color. Something like that. So this is the gold base on which the gem sits. And now we can take this and kind of copy it around to create the ring. I want to join this into one mesh, but I think if I try to join right now, yeah, it's going to do some weird stuff. So I think what we want to do is we want to take our geometry nodes object. We want to make sure these instances are realized, and then we apply the modifier. So it's an actual object now without any modifier transformations. And now we should be able to join these. Let's see. So I'm going to run the join command, and that looks pretty good, except for the normals, which I'm going to auto smooth. Okay. I think one thing I want to do is I want to bevel this to add a bit of extra light that can catch on the gold plate. Okay. So here we have our gemstone. I'm just going to rename this to gem, and the name of the game is kind of making a ring and copying them along the ring, which is a task perfect for geometry nodes. So I'm going to hide this gem, and inside geometry nodes, I'm going to make an object, make that a Geonodes group. You get the idea. And what we want to do is we want to make a circle. This is going to be where we're instancing our gem. And let's say we only want like 12 instances, so it's a low resolution circle. I'm going to instance on these points. And by the way, the reason I'm making it a curved circle instead of a mesh circle is we're also going to use this to create the actual ring, the golden ring part of it. But I want to instance a object being the gemstone, which is going to do this, which, 1, they're too big, but 2, they're kind of oriented badly. So we can fix the scale issue pretty easily by doing something like that. And for the orientation, we want them to kind of flow with the curve, with the tangent. So I'm going to use the curve tangent. This is a trick we use all the time. We take this vector and we turn it into rotation data. So I'm going to use align Euler to vector, which is going to take this tangent, turn it into rotation data. And now you can see we're doing kind of this radial thing. But I want them all to, I think this is the one we want. And we need to offset this by like 90 degrees. So I'm going to reveal the gemstone again. I want to make sure that this is sitting on the origin. So I'm just going to move it up, not with proportional editing. So I'm just moving up the gem so it's sitting on the XY plane. So that all of these are sitting on the XY plane. And then I think it should be as easy as adding a transform to this. And we rotate it on the Y-axis so that they're kind of normal to the ring. So basically, add this object, I rotated it on its side, and then I instanced it following these rules. Okay, let me bring down the size so they're not intersecting, and there we have our gemstones. And it looks pretty cool once you get to see a lot of them. But one thing that kind of takes this to the next level is if we have like randomized colors for these. So I'm going to realize these instances so that they're actual geometry. And the reason I'm doing that is now if we go to our gem material, we should be able to use the random per island to get a, you can kind of see we're getting a random value per the gemstone. Is that what we want? Something like that. I think our other option is to use the object info. No, I think we do want the random per island. So let's see what that gives us. I'm going to run a hue saturation value on this, send it through the hue, pick a color, and now we're getting randomized colors. Now, one thing I'm not understanding is why we have different colors per the gemstone. So if I connect this right now, let's see what that looks like. I actually do happen to like the look of that, but I want each gemstone to kind of be its own color. So to be honest, I think we must have done something weird with the modeling. There's a trick to get around this though. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the index of the instance. So this is just kind of a roundabout way to do this. I don't think I had to do this with the original, but we can take the index and store this as its own attribute. So I'm gonna call this index, and we wanna make sure this is sampling the instance. So we're getting the index of the instance, which looks like this when we view it. When we view the index, they're going to look like super white, but some of them are going to be brighter than others. Let's see if that works. So we're going to go over to the material, and we are going to bring in an attribute. We're going to call this index, which should give us the super bright white. There we go. And then if we were to kind of like clamp this down with a division, you can see we're actually getting this nice radial gradient. So again, I don't know why we had to do this, but we can connect this to the hue, which is going to give us all the same color because we're offsetting by 1. So I'm just going to divide this by 12. That's because we have 12 gemstones, and then we get this nice kind of radial gradient. And you can see now these gemstones are kind of increasing around kind of the spectrum of color, which kind of looks cooler than the randomization, honestly. So I'm going to keep it like this. Next, we have to actually make the ring. And for that, I'm going to use a curved circle. So I guess we can just make it its own node. Add resolution to this, and we are going to kind of create a torus here. So I'm going to curve to mesh, I believe. So we're going to run one on the other, which is going to look like this. It's going to make this torus. But if we bring down the outer radius, we can turn this into a ring. So I'm going to join this with the instances, and that is way too big. So I want to kind of scale this down so it's showing the gemstones, and I kind of want to stretch this out too, so it's not kind of like a perfect torus. But do we want to scale on the Y? Yeah, on the Y-axis by like 1.5. That gives it a bit more of a ring-like shape. Bring down the radius, and we could do a bit more than that, 1.75. You can see how this has more of a ring shape instead of a perfect torus. Now the gems are still kind of hovering here, so I'm going to bring up the radius just a little so they're more embedded. And this should be as easy as adding a set material and picking gold. And there you can see we have our ring as one cohesive object. Now one thing you can do is you can get a bit fancier with these materials, so I'm going to show you how to do that. But then we've kind of done it with our ring. So let me show you a trick we can do. With the gem material, it's kind of looking pretty plain, like it's this nice glass thing, but there's no detail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Voronoi texture, which you can see kind of creates these fragments along here. And if we create a normal map out of this, I believe we can do something fancy. So this will kind of create these cracks. So let's see what that looks like when we plug it into the normal. Yeah, that adds these nice kind of crack transitions inside of here. You could also try creating this as the normal, but then you'd have to do some like math to make sure it's not going out of bounds or anything. So I think I'm just going to connect it to the height. And can we increase the distance here? I don't think that matters. So that's just going to add a bit of extra detail there. We could also kind of use the distance, actually. Let's see what that looks like. So that's going to make our gradient, or our normal, super weird. So here's before and after. It kind of adds some nice visual interest. So I kind of like the look of that. Let's just bring down the strength a bit so it's not as intense. And there we have our ring. By the way, one final trick that we can do in compositing, now that we have viewport compositing, so click always enable, we can actually add some sparklies to this in the viewport. So again, viewport compositor is basically going to apply our composition inside the viewport, obviously. So if I was to do something like hue correct and like mess with the colors here, you can see it's actually changing in the viewport, which is pretty neat. So this happens to work with the glare node, and then we have these nice streaks that we can make less intense by decreasing the fade and also the threshold. But you can see it creates these nice sparklies that wouldn't have been here otherwise. So it just adds a bit of like extra emphasis to this. But that is how I made the ring. By the way, this tutorial has been sponsored by Skillshare, and if you do not know what Skillshare is, you're missing out because it's an online platform where you can learn pretty much any skill, photography, videography, even Blender. There are Blender courses on there. Any skill, especially digital skills, seem to be covered there, so you can check out whatever course you want and pick up a new skill. Or you can, if you want to go into industry, you can like use this as professional like career development. One course in particular I want to recommend is Southern Shoddy's course about introduction to Blender, actually getting you started. I'm a big fan of Southern Shoddy, and I think this is a good opportunity to start Blender from the ground up if you feel like you don't have the fundamentals down. So that is one course that I recommend. And if something like this interests you, you can actually click my link in the description to get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can actually test out if you want to do it, and then, you know, continue if you want to. And I should mention that that deal is only available to the first 1,000 people who do click that link in the description, so be fast.